because this is going to be our last webinar in the learning journey. And as you'll see, for now at least, this is the last learning journey I'm planning to host, because I'm going to be changing modes. I guess in a way I already changed modes and I'm ready to jump tracks to just be fully in the other mode. But you'll all be invited to join the other one too, although you may not have realized you're already in it. So we'll get to that in a moment. But today what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to offer a reframe. And I don't know how many of you know this, but I actually worked with the founder of cognitive linguistics, George Lakoff, back in 2007 and 2008. And so I studied framing and I became an expert in cognitive semantics. And I spent about 10 years actually teaching people all over the world how the mind creates reality. And so what I want to do today is invite us collectively to create a new reality for what this learning journey is. So I'm going to offer a reframe, like a different conceptual lens or perspective for what we've been doing in the last 8 weeks that really, as you'll see, we've been doing for a wee bit longer than that. And I'll try and give us a proper container for holding the context of what we're doing here. And so in many ways, there are two goals. There's just really two primary goals of this webinar. One is to reframe what is the real learning journey that we're in, not just this 8 weeks of meeting in the rhythm that we've been meeting. What is the real learning journey? And how do we continue the learning journey knowing what the real learning journey is? So with that knowledge, which is a bit drastic, I will say, what the real learning journey is, maybe more than you signed up for, if you signed up for 8 weeks, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. And what I'm sensing is that there's a real need in this moment in time for us to have good containers, for us to have stories that fit within contexts, where those contexts are framed in a way that they tell us what is real. Because it's so easy to frame ourselves into contexts that are, I might say, sub-real, like they're real socially, they're socially constructed. Like, for example, the United States is a socially constructed narrative that happens to have legal and political and military enforcement, but it's a fiction that was created. So there are a lot of realities that are pretty ephemeral. And some of them, I would even argue the nation state, are going to be pretty short-lived in the grand scheme of things. If you think like a planet, they're very short-lived. And so what we're going to be doing today is asking ourselves, how do we live into the real learning journey? And what is it anyway? And I'm going to spend a little time sharing some of the context of my story of how I'm living into it to just show one expression of what this means. And there'll be a bit of what we covered today that some of you have seen earlier this week and other presentations I've given, but I want to be sure we have a shared context for it. And so with that said, I just want to say, Pam, it's so lovely to have you here. I'm glad you decided to come and hope it didn't damage your weekend plans too much. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started because I want to have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So I'm just going to jump right in. Here we are. So first of all, what do we mean when we create a frame like the real learning journey? Notice how this semantic construct implies that there's a fake learning journey. It says if there's a real one, there must have been a false one. If there's a real one, there's one that's not real. And so what I want to say is there's been one that's been real. These last 8 weeks have definitely been real, but there's a deeper one that I would argue is more real. And I took this picture last week. That's our friend Lilian, as we were walking down an ancestral footpath to the village of Guane. And I just thought this picture captured really nicely for me what it means to go into this real learning journey, which is we're going to go down a very old path. We're going to enter into structures of the planet that were there before humans came. And even before we came, there were other humans there too. And so what you see in this view is a walk down into the canyon of the great turn of the Northern Andes in Colombia, where that The canyon in front of you that you can't quite see below the mountains that are to the west goes by the colonizer name of Rio Suarez and the indigenous name of Rio Saravita. And it's a landscape that is millions of years old and has had human habitation for at least 7,000 years. So what does it mean to walk into a landscape with multi-layered history? With history of humans for part of the time, history of rivers for much longer, and we're trying to get to what is real. And for me, this metaphor of entering into the canyon to find what is real, to find the big, deep, old context in which to place ourselves, is the task for us today. And so I want to begin by saying this. Here's our learning journey in the last 2 months. There was a time before and there was a time after, and we're gathering for 8 weeks. Well, in our fast-paced world of consumer products, it's easy to confuse an online course with what we're here to do, as though you signed up for an 8-week course, right? The truth is that this course was never the real learning journey. What we've been doing in the last 8 weeks, including right now, is dispelling falsehoods, revealing truths, and finding connection. Because the truth is, this was never an online course. And it's not going to stop being. Like, if there was an online course, then what happened up until now will end tomorrow, or I guess will end on Monday after the last community call. And I want to show you that this isn't going to end. There's no way that we can have the arrogance to believe this little 8-week course could end, because this little 8-week course wasn't what we were doing. So then what were we doing? Well, oh my God. The universe has been on a learning journey for more than 13 billion years. If you know the universe story of the Big Bang and the formation of quarks, and then the formation of electrons and protons and neutrons, and then the formation of molecules, and then the formation of stars and galaxies, and eventually planets, and eventually life on Earth. We are part of a giant learning journey that has been unfolding for 13 billion years. Who has been learning? The answer is, who hasn't been learning? It's another question to throw right back at us. Any learning that we know of has taken place in this universe. All life that we know of is on this planet. There may be life in other places, but we haven't found it yet. But the key thing is that the learning journey is so much bigger than us that we can't even properly conceive of it, because it's not human in scale. But the universe hasn't been learning how to be human for a few 100,000 years. So a few 100,000 years ago, estimates range from about 100,000 to 400,000. And currently the anthropologists and archaeologists and paleontologists say it's around 400,000 years. They may push it back a little bit further, but either way, the universe has been learning how to be human for a few 100,000 years, because there was this Big Bang, this cosmic evolution, the birth of a first generation star, its supernova explosion, the formation of our solar system, the formation of our planet, that eventually gave rise to us. And so humans, in our meager little 2-month learning journey, are embedded within this much bigger story. And if we want to know what our learning journey is, we need to understand what it means for the universe to try being human. What does it mean for stardust to be human? And does Gaia want to be human? Remember, by Gaia, I refer to the dynamic living Earth and her interdependent patterns of self-regulation, giving rise to what's sometimes called the Goldilocks effect. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too close to the sun, it's not too far from the sun. Gaia has been a living ecology for 3.6 to 3.8 billion years, and Gaia has been human for 300 to 400,000 years by having humans be part of the Earth. The Earth became bacteria. Did Gaia want to be bacteria? It sure seems that way, because there's been bacteria for 3 billion years. But did Gaia want to be dinosaurs? Yeah, for about 120, 150 million years, till a giant meteor struck the Yucatan. Now the question is, does Gaia want to be human? Gaia has been experimenting with putting the face of humans onto her body, trying to figure out, through her learning process, does she want to be human? Does she want humans to be part of her expression? Does she want human love, human fear, human compassion, human awe, human reverence? Does Gaia want to be human? That is our learning journey. Our learning journey is to answer the question, does Gaia want to be human? So let's place this in a little bit more immediate context. This graphic here was made in the famous Limits to Growth study that came out in 1972. And what they did is they ran a scenario called business as usual. And this was not a future forecast. It was not a prediction. But, oh my God, pretty much every major economic trend, every physical trend in that model has tracked reality with such disturbing accuracy that this computer simulation is a good approximation of reality. And in that computer simulation, they found that the human population starts to rapidly decline around the year 2030, which means we're probably entering into human population collapse. We've been in ecological overshoot since the mid-1970s, and the human population that has been hollowing out the rest of the Earth's biosphere by causing extinctions of non-human species is about to have its moment of reckoning. And so here's our context. Our little 2-month learning journey is happening right about there, right in the place where we're at the peak of planetary collapse. Our little 2-month learning journey is bedded within a larger learning journey of Gaia figuring out if she wants to be human, which is part of a larger learning journey of Gaia being Gaia, which is part of a larger learning journey with a universe that creates Gaia-like planets. So our learning journey takes place at the peak of planetary collapse, at the time when the changes are the most intense and the collapse patterns are about to become the most severe. The most severe changes have not yet occurred, but they will in the next half century. And so as we live into the moments after these 2 months, this tiny little speck of history, we are going to fall into the peak of planetary collapse because that's where we are right now. And I want to remind us of this. These are the 9 planetary boundaries that are defined by the Stockholm Resilience Center. That if we cross out of the safe operating range for even one, homeostasis of the planet, Holocene-like stable warm conditions, which gave rise to all of human civilizations, become impossible. And recall, in 2015, they said we'd crossed 4 of them. In 2021, they said we crossed 2 more. Earlier this year, they said we crossed another one. And then a study came out defining a 10th planetary boundary called green water, which is basically all of the life processes of our hydrological system. And this means 8 of 10 of the planetary boundaries are beyond the safe zone. So it's not simply the limits to growth study saying human population could collapse based on a scenario that wasn't a prediction. It's that the best scientific knowledge we have, which this framework, this Earth system science framework, did not exist during the limits to growth study in 1972. That study did not know about climate change. And the word biodiversity was invented in 1986. So biodiversity couldn't be measured in the limits to growth study. And as we started measuring these things, as our knowledge improved, we found not only is the limits to growth study probably correct, but the future scenarios of collapse are probably worse and more intense than what that study showed. And so this is where we are. Our learning journey takes place in this moment, right now. This is what is real. And so this is also what is real. Yesterday, I took Elise, who's 5.5 years old. I took her to the bioparque, and she asked me to teach her how to prune the bushes. And here she is learning how to prune the bushes. And the reason I show you this picture is this is a moment of Gaia being human in service to Gaia. Because what is pruning? Pruning is understanding that there's a living force of energy and direction in a plant. This bush will try and push growth out every one of its branches. And by knowing this, we can selectively guide the growth of this plant. The branches Elisa is cutting off are dying. They're in a process biologists call senescence. During senescence, the part that's dying still takes energy from the rest of the body. And by pruning these branches, the body stops trying to keep alive something that's dying and instead gives all of its living energy from its roots and from its photosynthesis to the growth of the part that's still living. So by pruning, Elise is learning how to direct the life of the bush into the bush, instead of directing the life of the bush into the parts of the bush that are dying. And then as we cut those branches and leaves off, we stack them around baby trees and baby cacti, and we direct new life in other parts of the forest. These are all photos taken in the last week. The reason I show you this is that by awakening to our Gaian inheritance and understanding how living systems work, humans can choose to guide the flourishing of life. By pruning away what is dying and giving life to what is growing and directing it toward abundance, diversity, and resilience. And if my daughter can do that, you can too. And if you can do that, we can do that. And so the question for us is, does Gaia want her humans doing this? Is Gaia going to cause us to go extinct? Or is Gaia going to keep us around? This is our learning journey. And I'm trying to stack the deck in the favor of humans by the way I raise my daughter and the way we host these learning journeys. But the big learning journey, it's up to us. We have currently stacked the deck against us. Extinction is more likely than non-extinction because there aren't enough of us learning to be like Elise. So does Gaia want to be human? Let me put this in a context this way. I'm going to give the rapid version of the story as it pertains to humans. 3.5 billion years ago, Earth gives rise to life. Much, much later, she gives rise to her mammals. This gives rise to a diverse primate lineage, the emergence of many different kinds of humans, and all other human lineages have gone extinct except for Homo sapiens. And now the question is, as we enter into runaway cultural evolution through the hominid line, do we go extinct? Or do we become part of Earth's homeostasis? Do we help the planet have planetary health? Or does the planet shake us off like a bad fever? That's the question. That is Gaia's learning journey. And we, as humans, are going to answer the question if Gaia wants to be human or not. Gaia, through us, will answer that question. I like this graphic. I used to hate this graphic. This is a graphic of the 5 previous mass extinction events, showing the percentage of extinct genre. Remember, genre is a level above species. And so the Ordovician, more than half of the genres, which is like 70% of the species, went extinct. The Great Permian dying, 83% of genre, 99% of species. So you see these numbers are less than species percentage because a genre is a clustering of species. If one species continues to exist for a genre, that genre doesn't go away. And mass extinctions events are defined at the level of genre. By the way, genre is one level below families, and families are where mammals are. So these numbers are absolutely huge. What this graphic doesn't show is the 6th mass extinction event caused by yours truly, humans. So the question is, will there be humans after the current mass extinction event that is caused by cultural evolution in the human lineage? And so the answer is, do we become wise managers of cultural evolution and guide our cultural evolution in service of Gaia, or do we drive ourselves to extinction? That is the basic question in this learning journey. That's why we need to learn how to integrate ourselves into the building of soils and the protection of forests. We have to remember our mother. This picture here, above the words remember our mother, this picture was taken yesterday at a Centropic Agroforestry workshop here in Barichara. If we remember our mother, we gather and bring life to mother by having 20 people plant 5,000 plants in the Centropic Agroforestry system. They increase the fertility of land. They're honoring their mother by being like mother, which means they're being regeneration. So our learning journey is to integrate ourselves into the planet, remember our mother as part of the planet, and be the regeneration of the earth. Be the circulation of the oceans. Be the movement of the wind. Be the migration of whales. Be the growing of forests. Be regeneration. This relates to the story of Earth Regenerators. And I want to tell this story because this story shows how I am entering into the real learning journey. And as I enter into the real learning journey myself, maybe it'll give you insights into how you can do it for yourself. So Earth Regenerators was born the beginning of January, the year 2020, 2.5 years ago. Started as a study group in a free design school for people to read chapters of my unpublished manuscript for the design pathway for regenerating Earth. Very quickly, we started creating decentralized governance. From this decentralized governance came an explosion of pro-social groups because we incorporated pro-social processes to increase our social and emotional capacities to be in groups. This gave rise to the learning journeys, which started last year. The very first learning journey was a learning journey in regenerative finance that started in March of 2021. They've been going for 1.5 years. Right now, we are finishing the 6th learning journey. Learning journey number 1, regenerative finance. Number 2, the design pathway. Learning journey number 3, pro-social groups for Earth regeneration. Learning journey number 4, the design pathway. Learning journey number 5, pro-social groups for territories and bioregional development. Learning journey number 6, here, us, the design pathway. And so what we're learning to do, if you look at the pattern, create regenerative finance, learn how to be pro-social, apply it to territories, all the while remembering we have to learn to live regeneratively over and over again. That has been our process for 18 months. And so we gave rise to a Barichara Regeneration Fund, catalyzing and transforming actions on the ground in Colombia. We gave birth to an Earth Regenerators Fund that started to support Earth Regenerators to live the ways we talk about in these learning journeys. And quietly, underneath all of this, we've been laying the groundwork for a real-world prototype of bioregional regeneration in the northern Andes of Colombia. And at the same time, we gave rise to a project incubator that was born from the first learning journey. We gave rise to a group called Bioregional Catalysts, where people are trying to figure out, how do we live as territorial regeneration? How do we do it? But they're having those conversations virtually all over the planet while we're creating a living laboratory in Barichara. And what that means is the real learning journey includes emergent governance and finance for Earth regenerators all over the world. The real learning journey is not these 8-week processes. The real learning journey is learning to govern ourselves and learning to support each other to participate in a real world landscape regeneration. That's the real learning journey. And Earth Regenerators is in a powerful moment right now, because starting in February, we began a process of birthing a governance council that does not yet exist. A lot of governance processing and learning and structures have been built in the last 6 months through the decentralized processes of Earth Regenerators. And in parallel with this, I have been leading a process with all of the local collaborators in Barichara to create the Barichara Ecoversity. And so what this means is, where I am, we're creating a territorial foundation involving dozens of people. We're birthing learning centers like the Center in Syntropic Agroforestry, one devoted to transformation of local food systems, one that's devoted to independent media, another one that's being formed starting this week, an education fund for the development of children and families to live as regenerative cultures. And we're doing this on 500,000 hectares of land. Can you imagine how much work that is? Which means I've got to devote myself to this work. And I can't host these learning journeys for Earth Regenerators anymore. I need to focus on where my real learning journey is. And I want you to see how much I love and care about all of you and how much I care about this process of what we're doing together. And I know my next step is to be bioregional as fully as I can be and support this work in Barichara. So the question for you is, what is your real learning journey? Because you see, it's time for me to move into a new phase of life. I am going to be doing this work here, and that means I'm going to need to hand off the learning journeys, which has had wonderful support from our host teams throughout the entire 18 months, but other Earth Regenerators members will need to continue them. What does it mean to host learning journeys without Joe's webinars? Do you just go back and watch recordings of them? Do you do something different? How does it work? I don't know, but I fully trust you. I trust all of you because there are so many amazing people here. And so part of our real learning journey for some of you may be to run learning journeys in Earth Regenerators in the future. You see, we're all stepping up and leaning in because the time for real action is now, and there's no more time to waste. And a week ago, when I was here developing the Ecoversity, we had Willem Verwerda of Common Land Foundation join us. Why do I mention him? Because I want to give you a larger context. Common Land Foundation, which was created in 2012, works on large-scale landscapes of 100,000 hectares or larger for 20 years or longer, and they began in 2012 with 4 landscapes. The most well-known is the Altiplano in Spain, which is 1 million hectares large. And they found the funding to support 20 years or more of work on these large scales. And then they began the work of trying to find 50 more landscapes. They're at 15 right now. And after last week, Barichara is probably going to become number 16, which means for all the work we're doing locally on this 500,000 hectares of land, we're a small part of a much bigger movement. And Common Land is not the only player, but they represent this beautifully because they are part of a larger movement called 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people. They're moving to the scale of 1,000 landscapes. Now, for those of you who have looked at bioregions around the world, you'll know that the estimates for the number of bioregions range from about 600 to about 2,000, which means 1,000 landscapes is a pretty good approximation for covering the entire planet with landscape scale regeneration. So what we're doing in Barichara is joining this larger movement. And can you imagine how much work it's going to be just in Barichara to do what we're trying to do? Multiply that by 1,000, by 1,000, and ask yourself, what is the real learning journey for you? Which of those 1,000 landscapes will you place yourself in? How will you help those 1,000 landscapes to be born? Is it where you're living now? Are you going to come to Colombia and help us? Are you going to go on a search to find your way? The real learning journey calls upon us to think this large and to do work at this scale, because no scale smaller than this can safeguard humanity from extinction. We need to create that bioregional network across every continent on Earth. And the way to do it is landscape by landscape, territory by territory, watershed by watershed, across the entire planet. If Gaia wants to keep her humans around, she will mobilize us into bioregions. And we will manifest the rest of our lives as bioregional beings. This is the real learning journey. Can we do this before it's too late? It might already be too late. So whether we can do it or not is an open question. Where I am, we're doing it with the Barichara Ecoversity, and we're going to work on bringing rivers back to life and protecting forest and local culture. And I wanted to show you this graphic. Some of you have seen this from other talks I've given this week, but I want to show you this because I want you to start to see, what does it feel like to live and to work this large? And notice how this is not the same as having a permaculture garden, planting trees in your backyard, or volunteering in your community. This is something much, much bigger. The real learning journey requires us to go to this scale. The vertical axis is the level of investment. You can use money as an approximation because you have to invest knowledge and skills and infrastructure, lots of things, but there's a level of investment and there's a time frame. And this is a model developed by Common Land. So this is one model, it just happens to be one of the best in the world for this kind of work. And it looks like this. They always work on 20-year timeframes or longer, minimum 20 years. And they have found that it is not possible to regenerate an entire landscape without finding the resources to support a core team of people who sustain the work continuously for 20 years or longer. For those of you who are old enough to remember in the 1950s and 60s, when you could be a corporate man, it was mostly men back in those days because of the way that sexism worked, where you could go and work at IBM until you retired, right? Here we're talking about being like the corporate man, except it's the bioregional human. Can you be part of a core team of 15 to 20 people who hold a territorial regeneration process for 20 years or longer? Can you do that? Can you mobilize the resources and sustain yourself in one place for 20 years or longer? Because that's the minimum for doing this work. Find your core team and join it, create it, whatever you need to do this work at the large scale. And then on top of that core team, we need lots of regenerative projects. By the way, these regenerative projects make no sense to the extractive economy. They don't generate money. They need to be invested in with philanthropy, with community engagement, with community leadership, with nonprofits. These regenerative projects create the commons on which a regenerative economy can be born. And what Common Land Foundation found was it's a minimum of 8 years. Usually it's 8 to 10 years before profitable businesses, meaning businesses that generate enough revenue to make money and reinvest in the community. Those don't start to happen until you cross this thing that's called the valley of death, where regenerative businesses go to die because they don't have enough of a commons to live within. You have to regenerate enough of your people, your culture, your land for these regenerative businesses to be viable. And only after those regenerative models come into being do people understand what the hell they are, and only then does local government and other groups start to support them. Because before that, they're pretty clueless. You probably notice how stupid our governments are all over the world right now. They have no fucking clue what a regenerative economy is. They're destroying their biosphere thinking it's profitable. They're fucking idiots. Yes, I'm cursing, because they're that stupid. And so governments are not the leaders here. At best, they will follow our lead, and that's if they follow at all. And this is the real model, folks. This is how it works. Minimum of 20 years, minimum 100,000 hectares, core team of 15 to 20 people, a slurry of non-viable regenerative projects that are held until a regenerative economy can be born. If you're wondering why you can't just jump into the regenerative economy now, this is why. If you want someone to pay you to build a regenerative economy now, this is why you're not going to find it. You need to be on one of these core teams to support the regenerative projects that create the ecosystem where regenerative businesses can be born, and only then will people be funded to do this work. And in the meantime, we're going to shoot past further planetary boundaries. We're going to go deeper into planetary collapse. Global supply chains are going to become more fragile. Abrupt climate change is going to keep speeding up. And that is exactly when we have to hold the course as Earth regenerators. I wanted you to see this framework to understand how big this is, and that we actually know how to do it, but not enough of us know how. Most of us are going to be individual people trying to find our way without knowing that without this entire ecosystem, regenerative economies don't work. They just don't work because we've degraded community and we've degraded ecology so much that we have to regenerate things with the commons of core teams and regenerative projects for a minimum of 8 to 10 years, for a minimum of 100,000 hectares of land, for us to even have a chance of this working. So we have to get organized, and we got to go fast. There's no time to waste. This is the real learning journey. I want to focus on the core team because when I spoke with Willem Verweerda at Common Land, he just emphasized over and over again, the problem is people keep funding projects. Projects come and go, and you need projects. But if you don't fund the core team, the projects just come and go. You need a core team. And he found in practice a core team for every landscape is about $500,000 per year. Do the math, $500,000 for 20 years is $10 million. Meaning if we cannot raise the capacity somehow in either money or definancialized equivalents to support the livelihood of a core team for 20 years, we're dead on arrival. So we got to get our shit together and cooperate really well. So creating these core teams is minimum. Why? because the core teams hold the process. They make sure that integration happens. They hold the territory. They continue integrating. They continue weaving. They keep the intention. They don't get drawn away from it. They hold the course through thick and thin, through feast and famine, through drought and flood for 20 years or longer. And this is what manages the risk. Because risks are everywhere and they're getting bigger. The only way to manage risk is to have a set of very capable, very devoted human beings supporting each other and their territories indefinitely into the future. That's the only way to manage the risks for our landscapes. And this is what makes holism possible. The core team of people, where I am in Barichara, we have the wonderful team creating syntropic agroforestry, the wonderful team creating the territorial foundation. They are part of this core team. In the last 3 years, I've been finding and mobilizing my Colombian friends in Barichara for them to realize this is what they need to be. And this year they figured it out and they're starting to believe they can do it. And this is what makes holism possible. We need to create the investment instruments to fund these core teams so that these large-scale landscape regeneration projects can occur. So if you live in a city, you can do fundraising for these core teams in other places on Earth. I know Gail Cullen is here. Gail, if you're doing work for conservation in Ecuador, figure out how they can build their core teams for their landscapes and help them create the investment instruments. You see, this way of thinking, this model of development is so different from what we're used to. But if we don't understand the real learning journeys at this scale, we're going to play the wrong game. We're going to play the game of creating a permaculture farm. And it's going to die by being overwhelmed by changing climate patterns, invasion from hungry people from the cities, and all kinds of other things that are at landscape scales. Our only hope is to work at this level. It's our only hope. I want to show you how this works in practical terms, because I want you to see that this is not only possible, but that we're doing it. We're doing it. I am doing it. It's really happening. This is a picture of Colombia. This is a picture of Colombia as a three-dimensional relief map to show you the terrain. Those are the northern Andes. See, the northern Andes divided into 3 mountain ranges. Where I live is right here in the great turn of the northern Andes, 500,000 hectares of integrated landscape. Our economy doesn't know it's an integrated landscape, but the reality is that it is. And so when you start thinking about this way of building a core team, you have to ask yourself, what is our landscape? Why do I define the landscape this way? Because I studied cloud formation, and when I came here, I saw that there is a well-defined regional climate system with a unique ecology that is appropriate to this climate system. And this climate is currently becoming a desert due to deforestation, biodiversity loss, and extractive practices. So we have to create regenerative economic processes, reforestation, reverse desertification, and restore the regional climate system. Or else we're fucked. You see, this is the scale of the climate system. This is the scale of our economy. If we go smaller than this, it's not going to work, because the larger system will be the climate system. And guess what's going to decide where we can grow food in the future? The climate system. So if we don't design for its regeneration, we're fucked. We're screwed. We have to think at these larger scales. Now, I actually wrote out this approach that I'm talking about now, the real learning journey, on the back cover of my book. See, this is what Earth Regenerators is for: giving birth to regenerative bioregions. Why do I say that? Because remember, Earth Regenerators started as a study group to read chapters of this book. And this is what I wrote on the back cover: a planet-wide network of learning ecosystems is needed that can hold the complexity of birthing these regenerative bioregions during and after the rest of the collapse that we were all born into. See, this wasn't by accident. Earth Regenerators gathered around this vision. There are 4,000 of us in Earth Regenerators. Whether all of us realize it or not, this was the mission that gathered us together. Right here, a planet-wide network of learning ecosystems that can hold the complexity of birthing regenerative bioregions. Bioregions, not regenerative permaculture projects. and do it during and after the rest of the collapse we were all born into. This is the real learning journey for us humans, right here. Can we do this? So as I said before, Earth Regenerators is in the process of creating its own governance council. And I'm going to begin after this webinar, after today, fully focusing myself on the Barichara ecoversity. And that means that we are now beginning a transition process where Earth Regenerators will take a different form. And these learning journeys will become a different part of a different ecosystem. And that means others need to take over or transform the learning journeys that have been taking place. And we need to evolve a regenerative finance system, which means Earth Regenerators need a way to support each other as Earth Regenerators. A few of you know that there's a project sitting in a back corner right now called the Vivero, which will be like Patreon for Earth Regenerators, and it's about to go public, which means you will have the opportunity as an Earth Regenerator to make monthly donations, recurring donations to Earth Regenerators to support other Earth Regenerators. That is a regenerative finance system. And this will grow in parallel with Barichara. So for those of you who want to continue working with me, you can replicate what we're doing in Barichara into other bioregions. And of course, my personal learning journey, the big real learning journey I'm in, you can participate in that by joining the Barichara updates. And we have a pledge community for people that are supporting the ecoversity. And you can find out about that by just sending me a message and asking me. But what I want to tell you is my learning journey is open to others to continue learning in, but these will be the ways to participate. Help us birth the ecoversity, learn how we are regenerating a territory, apply it to a different territory, wherever you might be, and we will be collaborating in the real learning journey. And it's not going to end in 8 weeks because it's not going to end in our lifetimes. So the question is, how can you continue the learning journey? And this is what I want to just show you, for those of you who are less familiar with how Earth Regenerators works, that actually there are several coherent islands of activity that already exist that you can go into when this 8-week learning journey ends. One is that in the realm of emergent finance and governance, there are 3 primary focus areas at the moment. One of them is called bioregional catalysts, which is a place where people are learning how to hold the complexity of bioregional regeneration. And you can see there's a lot of governance, and they will need to talk a lot about finance, because if they're going to support projects in real bioregions and catalyze them, they're going to have to figure those parts out. There's an Earth Regenerator Fund and a governance group for it. The group, or it's actually a course on Earth Regenerators, is called Creating the Earth Regenerators Fund. And you can join that group to learn how they're creating governance for the entire Earth Regenerators platform. And you can join the Regenerative Project Incubator to support other people's projects, to talk about your own projects and get help, and learn how to manage projects and support projects together as an emergent finance and governance system. Also, there are many gathering places on Earth Regenerators. Some of them are a little bit older, like Campfire Talks, which actually a lot of the Campfire Talks activities are currently embedded within bioregional catalysts, but you can find both of them on the platform. Campfire Talks are gathering places to have conversations without a specific agenda, a place to weave with other people and connect. You can join the Design Pathway Deep Dive, which is a group that reads chapters of my book and uses it as a place to grapple with these very complex and challenging ideas together. You can go to book club and beyond, started as a book club and now they watch movies together and other things, to just share ideas and explore things and have conversations about a wide range of topics. And there's a new group that grew out of a giving economy conversation that's called Right Livelihood, that actually hosts giving circles and other supportive activities. And it's a gathering place to explore how to change your life and collaborate with other Earth Regenerators. Also, there's the Living Laboratory, which currently is primarily in Barichara, although some of you in bioregional catalysts would say the Osa Peninsula of Costa Rica is another living laboratory. And so there are places within the community that are doing living laboratory work, but the visible, coherent one that has been as a backbone of Earth Regenerators up until now has been Barichara. And so you can join the Barichara updates or the pledge community to enter into this living laboratory. And then, of course, there are various kinds of thematic inquiry. And I've only picked 3 here because there's regenerative parenting and there are others that I didn't mention. You can go all over Earth's Regenerators and look for them under groups and courses in the sidebar. But I want to mention that Pro-Social for Earth Regenerators is a place where you can go to learn how to join effective groups or learn how to create effective groups. There's Regenerative Water, which is part of the Regenerative Water Alliance, which is very active, including field site projects and online learnings. The Earth Regeneration Fund, not to be confused with its very similarly named Earth Regenerators Fund. The Earth Regeneration Fund is a place where people have been talking for about 1.5 years about how to create funding mechanisms and tools for Earth regeneration. And while it's not very active at the moment, you can go and see what's been happening there. What I want you to see is that you can enter into this much larger landscape, and you'll find lots of ways to participate in the real learning journey. And what I want to say is that these little islands of activity are just like real islands, have ground connecting them underneath. The Earth Regenerators landscape weaves across them, and each group, each place is connected to all the others through the people, through the learnings. So you might go to, for example, Right Livelihoods, and there you might participate in a gift circle. And in the gift circle, you realize you have a project, so you go to the project incubator to develop it. Project incubator, people tell you that what you're doing relates to water, so you should go join the regenerative water group. You see what I'm saying? The landscape is connected by the way we flow across it. And this landscape is big, diverse, and mature. So when I said that we need to create a planet-wide network of learning ecosystems, we need one that can hold the complexity of birthing these regenerative bioregions, which means working across these islands, working across territories, working across themes is going to be essential for us to live into the real learning journey for regenerating the Earth. So, where do you belong in the real learning journey? Let's discuss. So, how do we feel? Does it feel more clear? Do we have a container for what we're doing? Does the Earth want to keep her humans around? By the way, the part of the Earth that decides is the part that's human. It's us. And what I wanted to convey is that while it's overwhelmingly complex what we have to do, the tools and the models exist to do it. And they are being put into practice right now all over the planet, but most of us don't know. It was in January of 2021, 1.5 years ago, that Eco-Agriculture Partners announced the 1,000 Landscapes Project. 1.5 years ago. Did you know about it? Probably none of us knew about it. I knew about it because I had worked with Eco-Agriculture Partners back in 2019 through the Regenerative Communities Network. But most people didn't know about it. Most people don't know about Common Land, which is one of the best networks of landscape regeneration in the world, in part because they work with Eco-Agriculture Partners, who's one of the best in the world at implementing this large-scale work. There's a network of people doing this already. So while it may seem overwhelming and daunting, we're not starting from zero. We are decades in. So I'd love to invite questions, comments, and discussions, starting with you, Claire. Welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Oh my gosh. Wow. Gosh, every single one of your learning journey talks just, yeah, is amazing. Thank you. The thing that really grabbed me was when you first sort of earlier on in the week mentioned the core teams and the support for the core teams. And, you know, having tried to work in that space worked in that space for a long time with really acknowledging the lack of funding, but the lack of acknowledgement, like there's just no space. And the thing that I have had to stand against so often is the invalidation from all of the mainstream groups. So it feels to me that actually having a lot more conversation about the role of the core teams, what that looks like, just so that it has some kind of profile, because right now without enough profile, it's very hard to even feel that you're not the crazy one, because that's how you're treated. Yeah, I'd love you to speak more to that. And also just to say as well, we've been talking about in the bioregional catalysts, the role of the Weaver Guild, the Bioregional Weavers Guild. And I think there's a lot of crossover in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say what you're creating as a bioregional Weavers Guild would translate into the common land model as how to form a core team. I would say they're the same thing, is what I would say. And one thing that I can say from experience, because here in Barichara, we have a core team. And oh my God, when you watch that core team in action, when you watch a community of social entrepreneur weavers weaving together, it is a thing of absolute beauty. It's like watching a troupe of professional ballerinas. It's like watching world-class musicians jamming together. It's truly incredible what happens in these core teams. And one thing I think is really essential is the core team is a social niche. And so we need to realize that just like in any other kind of ecology, a niche forms from the functional relationships of the parts. And so the core team needs to have functional relationship among the people and their place in the community. And there are lots of different ways for doing systems mapping. Sometimes it's called community asset mapping. I know you know about this because it's work you do, so just naming it for all of us. For example, a community asset might be, who is someone who really knows the farmers or the food producers and is trusted and beloved by them? That person is a community asset. Or who is it that really knows the native trees and where to find native seeds? That person is a community asset. And so the ways of seeing these capacities and recognizing that they need to be woven together is the work of the initial catalyst of the core team, which in my experience has almost always been one person. Now, I'm not going to say it's only one person because I have no idea, but in my experience, it's been the one crazy person. It's been the one crazy person who said, I don't care if everyone thinks I'm crazy, I know what I'm doing. People are going to think I'm crazy for a really long time, but eventually I'm going to gather enough crazies together that everyone's going to look crazy because we're the same ones. Because we're the ones that are doing what works. And to be that person, Claire, I think you have been that person. You know how hard that is. You know how misunderstood that person is. And so one of the powerful things we can do is we might find that catalyzing weaver in our community. They may not be us. We may recognize them. And the best thing you can do them is just give them love. Let them know that they're seen. Let them know that while they feel really alone, they're not. So that they don't do something stupid like commit suicide under the stress of their loneliness. Like, seriously. So I would say the core team is a process of birthing an ecosystem. So we can apply the same permaculture principles for a forest. We can apply them to the core team, which is you observe, you work with the natural patterns, you start to build niche formation patterns that open up the niches, that enable ecological succession to begin, but it's culturally defined, which means you build trust and connection, shared identity, all these various pieces that are in the pro-social process. And so what I think we can do in the future is we can ask Willem to send someone from Common Land to speak with us about the core teams. And we can actually learn about it at Earth Regenerators. I think that when I explain to him what that means, I think we'll easily be able to do something like that. Because I think we're going to need people who have thought in this particular way, in this particular model, to say what it's meant to them. And then we'll start to see a lot of what we do is very similar, but there might be a couple of pieces we haven't thought of yet. But I see this as a future learning focus of bioregional catalysts. It's to invite that into being. So thank you, Claire. on to Gail.
It's not Ecuador.
Oh, oops.
We're in 6 countries, but the one that's in my mind that I want to talk to you about is Honduras. Our project, for those who don't know me, I'm co-director of One Earth Conservation. We do parrot conservation in 6 countries in Latin America. Our biggest project is in Honduras. And that's where we have the closest to what you're describing as a core team. We have local indigenous villages. We have a local NGO. We have us. We have the military to some extent. We also have some funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and some funding through the Wildlife Conservation Society that actually comes from the United Kingdom. In a way, we have the crazy person, the local person on the ground who leads the parrot conservation work has had assassination attempts on his life. He's now back in the forest, marching on, doing his work despite that, with bodyguards and such. We also have the crazy person here, which actually 2. Laura Kim is the main one, and I'm her devoted assistant. She's the one, and she has been there since 2010. She has been saying for years that she's committed to being there for a lifetime. So before Common Land, she was talking about 20, 30 years, got to be there, you know. The question is for me, so we have a core team already, and we have some money, but they kill us with the nitpicking. The Fish and Wildlife, you should see how Laura Kim and I have been tearing our hair out just this week. You didn't fill this form out. You forgot to dot the I over here. Oh my God. And WCS, what they do to make us every receipt, you know, going from lempiras to dollars to, oh my God. So rather than really letting us focus on doing the work, we're spending hours on this, pardon my French, bullshit, you know, and it's also like, I'd love Common Land to come and give us that $500,000 a year for our core team. Oh my God, we would do so much. We used to do 1 million acres. It's down to 500,000 because conflict in some of the villages. We're now taking the pro-social course. We're hoping that'll help with some of that. But it's immensely complicated. But we're set up for this. But it's not through permaculture. It's through parrot conservation. Why not, right? Why can't it be something like that that's bringing the people together? And then on top of that, maybe we bring in and say, oh, you need to take care of your forests. But then there's also the illegal loggers and there's the illegal drug traffickers. It is immensely complicated and immensely dangerous. So it's not like we haven't been thinking about this. And I have been trying to find funders for years for us now. It's very small. There's much more funding for the arts. I work with clients that are in the arts. They have much more success raising money than wildlife conservation, which is, I love the arts, but it's crazy. We're going to go extinct when we should be funding the wildlife conservation, you know?
This is actually related to the insight that Common Land found, which is that a partnership needs to be created at the landscape scale. And then the landscape tells its own story. And because it's telling a story at the landscape scale, that arts money that you're just talking about would be completely legitimate for the landscape scale. And so you wouldn't have a competition between arts and conservation. You would have a collaboration between them because of the focus. And this is one of the key pieces, is that we need to learn how to gather the narrative power, the power of the story that says enough of us have united that are working at the landscape scale. We are the core team, and we are telling the story of the landscape, its history, its needs, its future. And how are we legitimate in telling the story of its future? Because we've gathered stakeholders and we've convened them and we've mapped the futures that they desire. And there's a whole process. And only then is it really possible to attract the larger capacities. And even then, as you know, almost all of the funders are structurally stupid and getting stupider as we go further and further into ecological overshoot and collapse.
Very true.
And so we need to have very different ways of doing all of this, very different ways. And I just will clarify, Common Land is not giving us $500,000 per year. What they did is they found $500,000 per year for 4 landscapes back in 2012 and $500,000 for their foundation, which means they found $60 million so that they could begin by working with 4 landscapes that they fully funded. And then all of the landscapes after that, to get up to 50, they partner with them to help them find funding, but they don't bring it themselves. So just to know that it's not like Common Land is sitting on $1 billion and just adding landscapes. It's that they have found a way to convene and build this territorial capacity to then frame and structure how that can be turned into an investment instrument. And they have practice doing it, and they're now in 15 landscapes. So they're learning with those landscapes. And the real power is that community together of how they've been learning how to do it. So I guess what I would say is a challenge or an opportunity for us right now is because it happens that I'm friends with Willem. And it happens that Willem backpacked through Barichara back in the late 80s and loves this place, came here on vacation with his wife. And because I've been talking with them for 2.5 years, we arranged this territorial mapping experience for them. So we ended up doing work on his vacation. That we're in a place where we've been building a partnership for 2.5 years and it doesn't exist yet. But it's because the territory wasn't ready to approach them about collaborating. Not because they don't want to collaborate with different territories. So the territory has to organize its core team and create its territorial vision, and then they can partner to look for funding. They can partner to look for other things. And so you can see the opportunity for us is through groups like Bioregional Catalyst, through the creative ways we're fundraising, we can find ways together to help that landscape in Honduras. I would love to see you as a liaison between Earth Regenerators and that work in Honduras to be able to bring together the capacity for that funding package and for Earth Regenerators all over the planet to help it happen in Honduras. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to
So
be like
that's the kind of
Trisha.
thing.
You're talking about being like what Trisha was for and is for the OSA, right? Or you
Yeah.
are for Barichara.
Exactly.
I would love to do that. So that would mean joining Bioregional Catalysts, right?
Well, that would be a good start because you'll find that you're friends with everyone there already. But also, it's not because of it being bioregional catalysts. It's because the work has always been, for Earth Regenerators, always been, how do we regenerate bioregions? Some people didn't know that when they showed up. They're like, I'm here scared and confused, and I found some friends. But then they realize, oh shit, we're trying to do something big and complex here. And so the beauty of this is that we don't just talk about it. We don't just like grab our popcorn and watch Common Land doing it in Spain. Everyone else here is watching and saying, wow, Gail's really struggling in there in Honduras. I wish her the best. It's like, help Gail to do this. See, we can do this together. That's the beauty of being in Earth Regenerators. Earth Regenerators is not an organization. It is a community of people with this mission. And so with this mission, we could say, well, Gail, would you lead the process of creating the fundraising packet for Honduras and gather people in Earth Regenerators and create a group for that? It's like, and do that, maybe start on the project incubator. I don't know. Like, there are places you can do it. And in the last 2.5 years, we've been creating a lot of these structures. It's just that we, in a collective way, have not known that's what we were doing. But some of us have known it the whole time, and more of us do. I'll pass on to Brian now, who's been patiently waiting for his turn. But yeah, we'll get that done, okay? I promise. Somehow. Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. I wanted to just ask you, I learned of a group earlier involving, for me, the Hilo platform. Are you familiar with the Hilo platform? It's,
Yeah.
Okay. And then a little more specifically. So I've had engagement over the last few months with the Pro-Social Commons and David Sloan Wilson's group with that, but came into contact with the Terran
Collective.
Terran
Yeah.
Collective. Okay, so I just wanted to check on that. I actually posted my question in the chat, and where I say I understand the evolutionary process, at least in part to this point, as comprised of 3 primary components entailing variation, selection, and replication. I wonder whether you can similarly translate kind of that framing into something comparable to what you've been describing.
Yeah, I can do that. Let me do it at two levels. And I had the great pleasure and honor of working with David Sloan Wilson when we set up the Cultural Evolution Society. And I got to watch him doing this and translate what I was doing into evolutionary language. And so, for those of you who don't know, Charles Darwin is probably the most important scientist in history for a couple of reasons. One of them being that he figured out how innovation occurs. He figured out how innovation occurs in life, how do new species arise, which is a big kind of innovation. And so actually what Charles Darwin discovered in the theory of natural selection applies to every innovation process, just without exception. And it's because of the general nature of what he found. What he found was that there is an algorithm for life, an algorithm, like a formula, a mathematical process, a way of searching for ideas, searching for solutions. And it works this way. There's a population with great diversity, could be a population of rabbits in a forest, but each individual member of that population is different. Some are faster, some are slower, some are more aggressive, some are more passive, et cetera, et cetera. Anatomical and behavioral diversity. And then that anatomical and behavioral diversity, some members of the population are better fit for their environment, they're more likely to survive and thrive, and others are less fit. And so over time, there's a pruning process that the ones that are more fit tend to spread and propagate, and the ones that are less fit tend to be pruned away. And that is what Charles Darwin found. But for that to work, you have to have variation, which means you have to have diversity, and you have to have some mechanisms for selection, where selection just means because there's a bias and some things are more fit than others, there's some way of selecting them. Some way of selecting them that happens. But the reason a lot of people don't understand Darwin is that the selection happens backward in time. It's not that nature says all of the living examples are selecting which ones survive into the future. Like I kill you, I let you live. It actually is the ones that tended to survive were the ones that were selected, but you have to look backward in time to see how it happened. You have to see the ones that didn't continue as being selected away. And that's why people are confused about this process. But now let me show you how it works in creativity. So let's just take brainstorming for a second. What is brainstorming? Say there are three people sitting around a table together talking, and they start throwing out ideas. Why do they have different ideas? Because you need a diversity of ideas. Then they have some idea, some context they're applying their ideas to, and they're trying to figure out which ideas are better fit to that context. Like they may be brainstorming ideas for a surprise birthday party. And they're like, well, I'm throwing this party for my friend Mitty, but I happen to know Mitty gets really stressed by surprises. So part of our selection environment is knowing how she feels about surprises. And we might have an idea that says, well, we're going to have this big scary clown jump out of a cake. And we're like, Mitty probably wouldn't like that very much. You see, part of the selection environment, the selection process, is that ideas are more fit or less fit depending on what the context is. And so this variation and selection play out with ideas when we're brainstorming. Mitty, I'm just picking on you because you have your hands raised. I see you in the corner, and I'm imagining throwing parties for you because that'd be fun. But I just want you to see how it works. That even in the basic level of creating ideas for throwing a party, natural selection is playing out. Just most of us don't know how to see how general it is. So now let's go to the landscape scale. What happens? I'll use Barichara because we decided about 2 months ago, after we had been gifted $20,000 to support 6 months of work in syntropic agroforestry, our team gathered and we envisioned 6 months of work. And of course, we threw out a lot of ideas. And in the time of those ideas, they got pruned and structured into a really clear multi-level strategy for 6 months of work. And part of the selection that we were looking at was which populations of people in the Barichara territory should we focus on first? Well, we already knew in our first workshop that most of the people who came were wealthy landowners from Bogota. because those are the people who would know about it, who could afford to pay and all of that. So we decided we needed to create different selection criteria for the next workshop. The next workshop just finished yesterday. It happened this week. The second workshop was primarily for campesino people in the countryside. So we had to make it hard for those rich Bogotanos with their fincas to participate in that workshop. And we had to make it easy for local campesinos in the countryside to attend it. So we had to design the selection criteria. And so what I'm getting at here is that when we are creating territorial patterns, we actually can define to some extent what kind of variation there is, or we can find it, we can map it. And we can design selection criteria based on our goals, which creates intentional cultural evolution. And so one of the things we did in the workshop this week was we realized that every workshop creates a demonstration site, but we only have one teacher. And the teacher could manage our demonstration site really well because he's an expert, but no one else in the territory could manage syntropic agroforestry well enough. So we have to train people who are good enough to manage them. Who would be the best people to do that? Really motivated campesino youth. So in this workshop, we designed the price and the enrollment around recruiting highly motivated campesino youth that we could then find the resources to train to see if some of them would actually become the people that manage those projects. So you see selection and variation play out in how we are socially weaving syntropic agroforestry while building community leadership, while spreading regenerative projects in the territory. So I just wanted you to see that this evolutionary process guides our strategic thinking every step of the way at all levels.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Joe. In part because I'm working with practitioners primarily in a small group context or setting, but one of the tenets, and let me bounce this off of you if I can, and see how it sounds to you. So rather than working in more inclusive contexts, I have adopted the tenet of non-exclusivity, just to that kind of with respect to, call it karma or whatever you will. I mean, assuming the managerial responsibility because the last thing in a pro-social context you want are hard distinctions between in and out group, and so there is a responsibility to be assumed basically in moderating that context.
One thing I would say is that just like any biological cell has a membrane and it selects what's allowed in and what's not. Toxic chemicals are not allowed in. Nutritious food elements are welcomed in, and that exclusivity is essential to the survival of every biological organism at all scales. And the same is true for pro-social groups. Pro-social groups need to have criteria of inclusion, criteria of exclusion, and processes to kick their members out. At some moment in time, they need to figure that out because the identity is partly that it's distinct from other things around it. So the inclusion and exclusion boundaries are always navigated, meaning they're always navigated as any functioning group.
Yeah, it's not easy to make those determinations, right? I mean, people aren't wearing labels that say toxic on them, and so sometimes the group, so I've adapted that tenet kind of non-exclusivity, and sometimes have to give the group member the time and to some extent the opportunity to fail. I mean, they play their hand, and then the group, that's such experience that's shared by the group, but it makes the work challenging, right?
Yeah, I would say it's much more important to be pragmatic and empirical, while also being very careful not to be ideological. And what I see a lot of times, ideology will be things like, well, everyone should get along, so let's include everyone. You're like, that's going to create a really ineffective mushy group. And I was actually seeing that this week. I was invited into a Telegram group, and I watched it just imploding into stupid social justice things when it was supposed to be about designing a landscape or a watershed basin, decentralized autonomous organization. And I just looked at it and go, wow, they didn't. They just started adding people without a process of becoming a group, without figuring out who should be and who shouldn't, without figuring out what their mission and their purpose is. And so it was just like a shit show, total mess. And I just watched it, like, wow, they just added 400 people to this group in the span of a week. Like, just keep adding people. And one person started name calling to another person. They didn't even know each other. The whole conversation got sidetracked into bullshit. A bunch of people read and responded and tried to make everyone feel better. And guess what got done? That was the purpose of the group. Nothing. All of that time and energy was wasted because it's not a group. It's a collection of humans aggregated together in a very clumsy way. And it's a very, very ineffective way to function as a group. And so inclusion and exclusion are actually really important, and they're largely defined around identity and purpose. Exactly. Eleanor Ostrom's core design principles. Right. I'd love to jump over to MIDI now, because although this is actually, this level of clarity of the process is actually really important to explore and talk about. But luckily, lots of groups in Earth Regenerators do that, so there'll be more opportunity. But for now, MIDI, on to you.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I'd like to slightly stay with what you were discussing with Brian. And I'd also like to weave a couple of things in, one of which came up for me when I was listening to Gail. And it reminded me of the question of how do you tell your story? And a question that you were asking us in an earlier webinar. And I was reflecting that Gail is one of the people that I know who acts with great agency in Earth Regenerators. She's just done an extraordinary thing in supporting Gla, who I don't know if Gla is on the call, but many of us know him as a remarkable refugee from Uganda. Actually, he's from the Congo, but he lives in Uganda, and he is doing incredible work to train, educate refugees to take charge of their lives and feed themselves. And Gail is doing an extraordinary support job to help Gla receive the kind of practical support that he needs. So she's already doing this, exactly what you were saying to her she needs to do in the Honduras. And I'm sure as time goes on, Gail is going to do it even more. But what I really want to actually use this time to do is to say a little bit about what I have so appreciated in taking the journey with you. I've been so privileged to take 5 out of the 6 learning journeys with you. And I've been watching you, Joe Brewer. I've really been watching. What is the Joe Brewer magic? What is it that you do? And as you were talking with Brian, I realized that you live the Darwinian story. The first thing I've noted is that you are a master of framing. Unusually though, and I think it still is an unusual thing, there aren't many Joes in the world yet who can take that big picture framing context and bring it so directly down to earth and give the practical examples. And that's that weaving of, if you like, heaven and earth. It's the bringing the story to the point where I can understand it and I can see how and where I might apply it in my life. That is really unique in my experience of being on this journey with you. The other thing is that you tell your story with utter conviction, total agency. It doesn't seem to occur to you that what you believe and what you trust is true and possible cannot come to pass. Now, I'm sure there've been moments of doubt and moments of, oh my God, what have I got myself into? But when you tell your story, Joe, it is with utter agency. And you do this amazing job of inclusivity and exclusivity. You throw open the doors and say, hey, everybody, you interested? Come and join me on the journey. And you've done this again and again in the time I've known you in Earth Regenerators. That's how the Earth Regenerator Governance Fund group got started, thanks to you saying, hey, all of Earth Regenerators come. And about 40 people stuck up their hand and said they were interested. About 20 people joined a Telegram group to keep regularly updated. And about 12 of us have stayed the course since October and are just beginning to understand what it really means to work together and have the places where we can each do and be together what we're meant to do and be. But you also select out. You totally ignore that which doesn't fit your narrative. You will not get drawn into being sidetracked. Your conflict, sorry, I don't have a conflict with you. I'm not going to waste my energy on that. It's not in my agenda. I'm really happy to be friends with you when you're ready to be friends with me. Again and again, I've seen you embodying the inclusivity, exclusivity, but above all, what I've seen is you inspire us. You are really direct at saying, well, we maybe are going to go extinct. It's entirely possible. But now let's use our energy to make it possible to stay alive. And for that, and for all the other many, many things you offer, I just want to say thank you.
Mitty, when do I get to actually hug you? That's my question. It's going to happen one of these days. I'm just waiting. So just so you know.
Of course it has to.
So just adding that, don't know what else to say except that I love you and I feel seen. So that's all I'll say. And then on to you, Zab, please.
Yeah. I'd like to at least start with just continuing that line of deep gratitude, because on my personal learning journey, I've been on a ride, and I got back to our family farm like 6 years ago and started very much at the project scale. How do I become more self-sufficient? How can I, do workshops here, and then tinkering with my learnings from permaculture and regenerative agriculture, and like, oh wow, actually this food growing system I've sort of designed here is the value, not the garden itself, it's the system. So thinking how to replicate that, and these are the early ways that came about. And then just as it's gone along, started this thing, Future Whenua Summit, and later Future Whenua Charitable Trust, and I'm really just always inquiring into the deeper purpose of why we've set this up, and it's essentially like a governing board for regenerative projects, because we had, by this stage, several of our own, and then through the summit I'm connected with all these grassroots innovators and farmers that just aren't going to jump through the hoops and play that game to some. So it was like this loose, wasn't really sure. I'm sure it's been getting guided from being in this community, and also just through the morphic field of this movement that you've created and is taking on to the common land movement. And so it's just so profound to be in this community, and particularly like it's all just coming to this apex of like this talk when you've laid it out so clearly. So yeah, there's the deep gratitude. And then I did just want to get into a little bit more of the weeds of like what are the steps to create one of these bioregions. Like I could say, the Future Whenua bioregion, or, what we're going to work on here is the whole of the South Island. It's about 150,000 hectares. But like what what right do I have to say that when you know I only know Southland or parts of it. I haven't even been to large areas of the South Island. So it's like, you know, how do we say that we cover 100,000 hectares when, you know, of course we can't. And yeah, and just like building that team, and just what else would actually be the steps before having a legitimate conversation with likes of the common land.
That I want to start by saying your devotion is truly inspiring. Truly inspiring. I think it would do us all good if you told your story. If you told your story to the community. I think we would really learn a lot from you. Just wanted to say that first. And the key that I found is anchor yourself to a real system. Like, how can I speak for this territory on Barichara? I'm not even from this continent. Well, it's because I'm speaking for the climate system of this place. The mountain ranges make a climate system, and that climate system is real. And because there are not humans speaking for it, I can speak for it. And the legitimacy is not in whether I speak, it's in whether it's real. And so part of the key for what you're doing is to ask yourself, what are those nested systems? And one thing that Willem told in the story of the work in the Altiplano of Spain, which is a 1 million hectare project, it's their largest project, was they started off with this project. There was about 150,000 hectares, and they started convening people. You know, they were holding these different meetings. And as they had meetings, someone said, well, yeah, but you know, your farm has drainage and water that comes from that other place. We have to include that too. And they added it to the map. And then someone else said, yeah, but don't you know that that actually runs down here and affects these people? And they added it to the map. And eventually the map self-organized to the scale of the ecological function of the landscape. So if you want to jump ahead, sort of like go to week 6 of the homework on week 2 sort of thing, is jump ahead to what are the ecological functions that connect your entire landscape? What are the climatic patterns? What is the biogeography, which is the distribution of ecosystems? What are the ancestral lifeways of the indigenous people and how do they organize their economies? All of these are good approximations. But then have conversations that are inquiries, not answers. Why is it organized this way? Should we organize this way? What should we include? What shouldn't we include? What do those of us here, what do we care about? Like where I am, we care a lot about water. And I say we, meaning I think I can safely say most of the people in Barichara care a lot about water. And so I may be new here and I've started caring about water too, but I've actually joined a widespread shared concern that was already here. And so this other piece is mapping of concern. Like, what are the concerns of your landscape? Some of it, I'm sure you know, because the work you've been doing, host dialogues about that. Around that. Is there a concern about the future of food security? Is there concern about young people leaving the country and going to the city? Is there concern about some biological corridors that maintain key conservation of key species that people love in the area? Like you've probably just heard, monarch butterflies are now listed as endangered, and people all over the Americas are freaking out because we care so much about the biological corridors of this butterfly that spreads across 2 continents. Like, what are those connectivity patterns? And then what are the dialogues to have about them? Who should be invited? And how do you hold them? And who is the neutral partner that's respected and that can hold that neutral space? All those things I'm sure you're already thinking about. Connect them to landscape ecological function. Connect them to what are your weather patterns? What are your drainage basins? What are your ecological corridors? What are your regional trade networks? What do they look like? And each of those is an approximation of your landscape. And some amalgamation of them is what your landscape is going to land on. And so for you to speak for the entire South Island is for you to find something that the South Island needs to be spoken for. So like when I'm speaking for the climate system of the Northern Andes, why can I do that? Well, because I'm a climate scientist, because I studied cloud formation and what's called mesoscale weather patterns, which is weather patterns on the scale of about 100 kilometers. And so as an expert in cloud formation, I showed up here and I was probably the first human to be able to speak for the climate system. And so when Gaia speaks through her humans, she speaks through those who can speak. So what can you speak for in this land? What geologic function can you speak for in the land? What ecological capacities can you speak for in the land? What can you give human voice to that does not have a human voice because it's not human? So a river is not human. It doesn't have a human voice. You see what I'm getting at? And let the voice of the voiceless guide you. The voiceless parts of the earth that are voiceless because they're not human, how do humans speak for them? You might even find people who are already speaking for them, and you simply need to elevate their voice. It might turn out there's an indigenous elder. I don't know who it's going to be, but chances are you probably already know them. And so I would say that the legitimacy comes because you're speaking for a system that is real. And you can back it up by showing it's real. I can walk someone up to the bioparque and show them the weather patterns of this landscape. From the bioparque, you can see there are clouds in all directions where the mountains are, and there's blue skies overhead. And then look at a Google Earth map, and you see it's all deforested in the middle. And it's like, that's why. And that's legitimate. I'm speaking for the landscape. So that's the key. The secret is don't speak for you, speak for the land. But speak for the land in a way that's a real system. And that's why rivers are so powerful, because rivers are already well defined and people don't argue over them anymore. Does this water fall into this basin or that one? It's all been mapped. So rivers are a really good starting point. But I don't know, is this helpful for you?
It's helpful. Yes, thank you, Joe.
Yeah. And keep at it, and know you're gonna have a lot of friends here in this community. And I really do want you to tell your story. I think we'd all learn from it. How did you persevere through all of this? I think we'd all benefit from that. So just sit with that one a little bit. On to you, Stephen.
Okay, I'm in a hotel lobby. Can you hear me beyond the background noise?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. This is just a question. I don't know how much you can address given we've hit the hour and a half, but I think it's something that you need to speak to. And what is the place, or you talked about it a bit with Zebulon, but I think of all the people, particularly in the Doomer Optimist community, who are homesteading or looking at homesteading, which has a place, but I'm not sure what it is when you talk about Earth regeneration at bioregional scale. You could probably say something quickly, but then there's also something to speak to that, so that they, because I just get that, if they're playing by themselves, they're screwed.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
This relates so nicely to the concept of a holon. For those of you who know your Ken Wilber, holon is just a whole part relationship. Like I have cells in my body that are parts of a larger whole, which is tissues, and tissues are part of a larger whole, which is an organ, and organs are part of a larger whole, which is an organ system, and an organ system is part of a larger whole, which is an organism. And then of course, an organism is part of a larger whole, which is an ecosystem. So there are these whole part relationships all the way down and all the way up. The key is to have ecological wholes, to have a holistic ecological unit, in quotes, because it's actually part of a larger nested system. So you have to find your holon. And if you look at those homesteaders, what you're going to find is the first obvious holon is that they're part of a river basin somewhere. There's a river basin they're a part of. And so for them to not see themselves as part of that river basin, and every farmer knows this that lives next to a river, someone's pollution upstream affects their farm. Their pollution affects someone's farm downstream. And so that upstream downstream relationship tells them they better care about what their neighbors are doing. And so the key is to use that way of thinking. Anyone who's doing homesteading needs to think, what is the larger whole system whose health my health depends upon? And what you'll quickly find is rivers are always going to be part of that somehow. But eventually, regional weather systems are going to be part of it. But what the hell does that mean? Like, I grew up in Missouri. And for those of you who don't know, Missouri is in Tornado Alley. It's famous for these severe weather, severe thunderstorms that happen during the spring and summer. Now, why is it part of Tornado Alley? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but it's actually because of two larger scale things. It's because there are two jet streams, what are called the tropical jet and the subtropical jet, and they move up and down in the Great Plains of North America, which means there's another larger system, which is the Great Plains of North America, which starts at the Rocky Mountains and ends at the Ozarks, which is this very old mountain range in Missouri, which then connects to the Appalachians and other things. And so is the bioregion of where I grew up in Missouri the Great Plains? No, it's not, because I'm in the mountains of the Ozarks. But my weather system is affected by these larger scale structures, by a global pattern of jet streams, which say where the weather systems can go, and the Great Plains, which influence where all that giant continental scale mixing occurs. And so that means for me to work in the bioregion of the Ozarks in Missouri, I have to understand that I'm nested within larger systems, but those larger systems are actually different kinds of ecology and different kinds of culture. Different kinds of ancestral patterns for how to live within them. And so the nomadic pattern of following the buffalo is famous in the Great Plains of North America. And that is not how the people of the Ozarks lived. And so you can start to see that there are regional identities that are ecologically real, that are nested within larger systems, but they're holistic systems, and they're at the landscape scale. And so just as another way of painting that for those of you who know North America, one of the things that happens in Missouri, specifically it happens in St. Louis, is the confluence of two of the largest rivers of North America, the Mississippi River and the Missouri River. They meet in St. Louis. And the Mississippi River then aggregates further downstream, the Ohio River, the Arkansas River, et cetera, the Illinois River. These are all giant multi-state river systems. But the Missouri River starts in Montana. So it's continental scale. And the Mississippi River is a drainage for 40% of the North American continent. So it's too big to be a bioregion. But the people of the Missouri River, which is what the state of Missouri is named for, which is the indigenous people around St. Louis, they have a bioregion, which involves trade up and down parts of the Mississippi River, which more or less maps to the story of Huckleberry Finn and the trading up and down the river there, but it doesn't lead all the way to the mouth of the Mississippi in New Orleans. And so the key here is to see that like a river system like the Mississippi is too big. It's too big. And so even the question of the river system actually needs to be divided into subbasins. So the question is, what does my whole system's health depend upon that is culturally and ecologically defined? And the cultural part will be a regional trade network and a regionally coherent cultural system. And that's where we look at the indigenous for our inspiration. So you see that the way to define a bioregion is to blend ecological functions of landscapes with culturally extended human economic systems. Human economic systems, which are regional trade networks connected to the ecology of their place. And you end up getting to a scale that makes sense as a territory. And you know that it's dependent on larger systems. So you have to collaborate. You have to create a federation of bioregions to collaborate at that larger scale. The Mississippi River needs collaborations across roughly half of North America. So it's probably going to have like 20 different bioregions, maybe 30. The Amazon River is probably going to have 200 because the Amazon's the world's largest river. But the scale of each river that's a subbasin of the Mississippi may be a bioregion. And so see, this way of thinking is we have to do the upriver and downriver question, upstream, downstream, but then we have to look at this cultural, economic part to make sense of it. And we need to have hydrological and climatological and ecological parts included as well. And this is why most people have no idea how to think this way. Most people don't learn about earth science, and most people don't learn ecology. Most people don't learn climate. Most people don't really learn history. So they're pretty clueless. So those of us who are doing bioregional work have to do all of that. We have to learn our region's climate, its ecology, its history, its culture, its geology. All those things matter, which is why this is a very different way of thinking about education. So now, Stephen, is that good enough for now? It's really a big topic, but I hope that starts to give us a sense you can do it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Stephen. It's a great question. The way I'd like to end our conversation today is to say that it should be obvious this learning journey is not going to end. This learning journey is going to go on well after all of us here are dead and gone. It's going to go on for at least a few hundred more years, unless we go extinct sooner. The only way for this learning journey to end is for humans to go extinct. And so the question for us is, now that we're here, 8 weeks into being committed to this little tiny learning journey, how do we answer the questions that Gail and Zeb were asking? Those big, hard questions. How do we do bioregional work? How do we bring that to Honduras? How do we do that on the South Island? How do we do this anywhere we need to do it? And the questions that Brian was asking. How do we know how to include and exclude? How do we create effective pro-social groups? And the question I would ask of all of us is like, what would Gaia do? Because we can be Gaia. And it is as simple as Elise sitting under a bush, pruning little branches. It is as simple as that. And as difficult as what Gail said about Honduras. It's both at the same time. And we have to hold the different levels. Not in every moment, it's too much, we'll get exhausted. But there will be moments when we have to hold all the complexity. And the best way to hold the complexity is to have a core team. I did not attend the Centropic Agroforestry workshop this week because I was dealing with annoying, frustrating, life-destroying bureaucratic processes for my Colombian visa. Because the Colombian visa process is excruciatingly stupid for foreigners. And so just to show that if I wasn't part of a core team, I would have felt serious FOMO, serious fear of being left out. Like, oh my God, this amazing Centripetal workshop is happening and I'm not a part of it. But no, I trust my team. They're amazing. They rocked it. They did not need any white savior. Thank you very much. Which I'm not, by the way. I was like sitting at the bank trying to get them to let me receive money from the US, and the guy at the bank didn't know how to do it, even though they're an international bank. And I was like, how much stupid can I deal with? But I have a core team and they hold the process. And we hold the process together. And that is so essential for our long-term health and our long-term effectiveness. So what I want to invite from you is to ask yourself, where do you belong in this great learning journey? Gaia has been learning how to be human, and she's deciding whether she should keep her humans around. And where do you belong in that story? And so I look forward to seeing where all of us go with this. I'm really excited by where we are and how far we've come. I'm really genuinely excited and really inspired by what we can do. And I'm very curious where we're going to go. So I'm looking forward to seeing where you go. So with that, thank you everyone for all of your engagement and participation in the last 2 months. And let this be only a small step on a long journey together. So with that, thank you, and onward, fellow humans.